Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. Joining me today is astrologer Austin Kopic, and we're going to be talking about the astrological forecast for September of 2025. Hey, Austin, welcome back.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to see you again. We got a lot to talk about this month. So, we're going to spend the first hour talking about news and events from an astrological standpoint that have happened since our last forecast episode a month ago. Then, in the second hour of this podcast, we're going to transition to talking about the astrological forecast for September. So, as always, there'll be timestamps below this video or on the podcast website. So, you can jump forward to the forecast section about halfway through the episode if you want to skip the news section. But otherwise, before we get there, I want to do a quick overview of the astrology of September just to give you a preview of what we'll be talking about later in this episode. All right, so here is the planetary alignments calendar for September, which shows all of the stations and ingresses and lunations and other things this month. So, right away at the top of the month, Saturn retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces on September 1st. Then the following day, on the 2nd, Mercury moves into the sign of Virgo. On the 4th, we have a Mars Jupiter square, which takes place. Then 2 days later, Uranus stations retrograde in Gemini for the very first time, which is going to be a very loud station that tells us what that transit is all about in Gemini. The following day, we get our first eclipse of the month, which is a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces on September 7th. Then later that week, we get a Mercury cazimi on the 13th of September. Mercury opposes Saturn on the 17th. Then the same planet goes into Libra on the 18th. Venus goes into Virgo on the 19th. We get our second lunation of the month, which is a solar eclipse in the sign of Virgo on the 21st of September. Then the very next day, Mars moves into Scorpio and the Sun moves into Libra. Then the Sun opposes Neptune on the 23rd. And finally, Mars squares Pluto in our most difficult aspect of the month on the 24th and their surrounding dates. So those are some of the major things we're going to be talking about. And we're especially going to be paying attention to and talking a lot about eclipse season. So here's the eclipse season graphic that was designed for us by Madeline DeCoates from honeycomb.co, where eclipse season starts a week before the first eclipse on September 7th. So that brings us to right about when we're recording this episode and when I'll be releasing it on August 31st. What is today? Today is actually the 30th. Yeah. So eclipse season starts tomorrow, August 31st. And then eclipse season lasts all the way until at least 7 days after the second eclipse. So that's going to take us pretty much all the way to the end of September. Here is the Mars Jupiter square, giving it a 3-degree orb so that you can see how it's already in effect, sort of radiating outwards a few days before and after September 4th. And here is the more troubling Mars Pluto square, which goes exact on September 24th, but radiates outwards so that it's at least starting as early as September 20th, and it's going to last at least until September 28th or so in terms of the most intense phase of that transit. All right, but those are the major aspects that we're going to be talking about later in this episode. But for now, let's do the news section and let's start talking about and checking in on things that have been happening over the past month since we last checked in. So, hey, welcome back, Austin.
Hey, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so in this first section, I thought we could talk about the Saturn Neptune conjunction because that's been the signature aspect of this summer that got so close in July and August. But now that Saturn is about to retrograde back into Pisces and starting to move away from Neptune a little bit, I think we're starting to get enough distance from it to actually assess what happened and like what were some of the major themes that we've been seeing this summer. And my two keywords for this in terms of this segment with Saturn and Neptune is that we hit sort of peak reality distortion in the reality distortion field that Saturn and Neptune has sort of created over the past few months. But then also, especially this month, with Mars moving into Libra and then opposing the Saturn Neptune conjunction, that Mars has acted like a knife or like a pin that has like pierced it and popped a lot of bubbles that had formed surrounding the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So our two keywords are like peak reality distortion that's happened over the past few months, but also bubbles popping, especially in August. So nowhere was that more obvious. There's been a bunch of instances of bubbles popping, but one of the ways that came up is there was this whole string of articles this month. Like, for example, Forbes on August 21st titled, "Is the AI Bubble Bursting? Lessons from the Dot-Com Era?" Or The Guardian the same day wrote, "Is the AI bubble about to burst and send the stock market into free fall?" And I was talking to you and you were researching this more, Austin. You said this was actually based on an MIT study that came out, right?
Yeah, there was an MIT study that was released earlier this month that looked at businesses that had made investments in generative AI, and those investments totaled between 30 and 40 billion. And disturbingly, 95% of the businesses that had invested said that they'd seen no return, no measurable positive return from their investment. That the use cases were just not there, or that they were less effective, less helpful than they had hoped based on the investment. And so that's a pretty striking statistic. And when combined with some of the other, how should we say, cultural backlash against AI, strengthened a lot of this wave of criticism. And then also Sam Altman, probably the most famous single person in AI, also said that he thought that AI was in a bubble, which he quickly followed by saying that he had immense belief that it was going to transform everything. It was really great. But people clipped and focused on him saying that, yeah, it's probably in a bubble, and that is also cited in a million different articles and videos.
Right. And a lot of people were comparing it to the dot-com era where at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s there was like this rush, this like gold rush of everybody setting up websites and like putting huge amounts of money into internet commerce sites and other things like that. But they were just spending really like wildly and everyone was trying to get in on it. And then eventually there was a crash. But then, it's not like I think there's a parallel there because with the dot-com bubble, it's not like the internet like went away and stopped being a thing after the late 90s and early 2000s. It did. There was a huge crash though in terms of the amount of money that was like wasted and spended wildly trying to like get in on the next big thing. But out of the rubble of the dot-com crash, we did have the foundation of what became the dominant players in the internet today, like, Amazon, Google, eventually later on like YouTube developing out of that, or social media sites
Yeah.
like Facebook originally eventually emerging. So there will probably be something like that is kind of my reaction to some of that.
Yeah, well, a bubble doesn't mean that there's no value there. It just means that it's overvalued. And I've seen a number of pieces um, taking that comparison to the dot com era and trying to figure out to what or the dot com bubble and trying to figure out to what degree it is parallel and how is it different, et cetera, et cetera. But that's certainly the question that's being brought up because there is a shocking amount of money that's gone into AI over the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was another, like a singular sort of viral moment that I think was also really symbolically significant in terms of this notion of like reality distortion and bubbles popping. And there was this video that went viral where it looks like it's outside and it's about like bunnies jumping on a trampoline. And it looks like a security camera footage that's like pointed at somebody's outdoor trampoline. And then you see these rabbits like sort of around the edge of the trampoline, but then they just slowly move in and start like bouncing on it. And this clip went super viral, but then because it looks real, but then like in the next few days, eventually it came out that this was AI generated. And I think this was like a huge moment for a lot of people because there was a lot of people that were convinced like, they grew up with the internet and maybe their parents or their grandparents can be tricked by this AI stuff that's being shared on Facebook, but like we're more savvy. But then all of a sudden there was just like this huge amount of people that actually thought that this was a real clip and then suddenly had that bubble popped and then realized in the process that they also were susceptible to AI stuff that was like, because it was like something that like once you realize it's AI generated, you're like, oh, of course. Like it's just barely above the threshold of something that could be legitimate. But once you realize it wasn't, you kind of realize that that was a dumb thing to assume in the first place. And I thought that was a really interesting moment. Did you see that clip?
I did. I did. It was sent to me with a like, "Hey, this was AI and fooled a lot of people," so I didn't have a chance to get fooled or not.
Mm,
But yeah, it speaks to the larger Saturn Neptune thing, which is what is the difference between reality and illusion? And this some of what AI has been generating this year has not erased by any stretch of the imagination, but narrowed the uncanny valley to the point, and it has narrowed the uncanny valley where more people are more easily fooled. The question I have is to what degree does the human adapt to that? Because when moving pictures first started, people thought, "Oh boy, that train's going to come out of the screen and run us over," like famously. But we adjust and become more our perceptions become more acute where they need to be in order to tell the difference between illusion and reality. But that takes a while, and we're certainly in this era where if we are going to like catch up and be able to see tell the difference really easily, largely we haven't, like the tech word. And so it really, as you're saying, it characterizes this period of time where there is maximal difference in, or excuse me, maximal difficulty in people telling and what's not real or what's only kind of real. What is, yeah, what it's an ontological crisis for sure. And whether it gets
yeah.
solved or not next year or the next year, it's for now.
Absolutely. And one of the things I noticed that's funny about this is people as humans are like wrestling with this is in some instances, it's causing them to think that things are AI that aren't, which is a funny thing, is like the defense mechanism is becoming super hyper aware, but then all of a sudden it's making people assume things are AI. And like even on some of my videos, I've posted like some shorts recently, and then people have accused it of being AI, which I thought was really funny. So I think that's one interesting side effect as well is even like a paranoia about like not knowing what's AI and what's not. But I do think that this is the summer that we'll always remember when AI generated video and stuff became good enough to pass for real in a way that started significantly impacting society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to give a shout out. It was funny about the bunnies and the viral thing, but there was even a song about it. Like some guy wrote a song about it named Oliver Rickman at Olive Songs 11 and his single Bunnies on TikTok. But the lyrics of it I thought were funny. Thinking about the Saturn Neptune and how we talked about for years in anticipation of this, how there'll be this tension between telling what's real and what's not real this summer, peaking with the Saturn Neptune conjunction getting close for the first time. And the lyrics of his song, it says, there were bunnies that were jumping on a trampoline, and I just learned that they weren't real. If a bot can inhabit an unknowing rabbit, it might manufacture the way you made me feel.
Creating what appears to be versus what is, right? Verifying and refining. But boys had gotten harder and taken more energy than is reasonable in recent months. It's like, do I have the strength? Do I have the 2 hours to dig through and figure out whether to what degree this thing that everybody's talking about is real or not real or whatever bizarre combination? I don't think I'm the only person who's feeling the fatigue of the labor necessary to actually feel some level of certainty about a topic that people are talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what's crazy is it's also being actively made harder to do that. So, like with a lot of the government stuff right now, there's government data that's being hidden and obscured in order to make reality less clear. So, like that was one of the Mars Saturn opposition events that happened at the beginning of the month. Is there was a jobs report that was released in the U.S. At the beginning, early in August, and the jobs report said that the job numbers were actually worse the previous month than they assumed. And what the day that report was released, saying that the jobs market was looking worse than thought previously, Trump immediately like fired the person behind the jobs report because he didn't like them putting out that kind of data that was like saying how the economy was doing. Or more recently, there was a bunch of people that have suddenly like quit the CDC. And there was one of them, at least, that was citing a manipulation of the data that was happening there as part of the reason they were leaving. So there's even like active attempts to sort of like create this reality distortion involving like numbers and objective facts.
Yeah, and that's on top of the pre-existing difficulties, right? It's not like a jobs report is just is an objective thing where nobody has any valid critiques of the metrics used, right? Like there are questions about like, well, do the metrics used like still tell us what we need to know in a gig economy, et cetera, et cetera. But you take something that already requires a lot of thinking to turn into a meaningful set of statements about the world. And then that gets further distorted or obscured. So it's just like another layer of simulacra and distortion, which just means exhaustion, right? For a lot of people. Like I found myself giving up on trying to figure out what was going on with X or Y, as
Mm.
opposed to becoming obsessed long enough to have a meaningful to come out with something meaningfully processed idea. Just like, dude, it's not worth it. I can't. I don't have enough time. Did I mention that the Saturn Neptune has been on my Mercury? So perhaps I'm getting some of this more acutely. But again, I doubt it's just me that's feeling the like what is it, epistemological exhaustion that accompanies an ontological crisis. We're going to get fancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was you mentioned tariffs. I just wanted to mention this briefly as a side note because this just happened yesterday. But I saw something about some courts deemed Trump's tariffs to be not legal, and therefore it put a potential like temporary hold on the tariffs. And I thought that was really interesting astrologically because Jupiter is at 17 degrees of Cancer right now. And that's exactly where Mars was in February, where Mars stationed direct all in February, where the tariffs and the implementation of the tariffs was like the primary piece of news. So it's another one of those instances of like something being created that's kind of causing problems back during the Mars retrograde in those degrees. But then in some instances, having some sort of like counterbalance to that come in with Jupiter now going through the same degrees. And I mean, I'm sure that's not going to stick. Like they'll probably just send it to the Supreme Court and the tariffs will be re implemented. But it's interesting nonetheless as a piece of astrology.
Yeah, well, especially with the contrast between Mars and Jupiter, and especially how they do in Cancer. And that's a great point that Jupiter has just passed Mars's station degree, and so will for quite some time, actually for God, almost 9 months, I think 9 or 10 months for the next 9 or 10 months, will be dwelling in the area that Mars retrograded. And when it entered Cancer, it entered the sign that Mars spent a lot of retrograde in, but now it's actually crossed into those degrees. And I don't believe that Jupiter's retrograde takes it out of those degrees, or if so, not very far, just barely. So we're really into that zone that you pointed to earlier in the year, where Jupiter is in position to do some reparative, preventative, useful, happy, healthy things in a portion of the zodiac that was damaged, damaged quite a bit during the first part of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll come back to that later, but
Yeah.
to round out the Saturn Neptune section, another major topic that came out this month that was like a huge topic was this phrase AI psychosis became a major topic. So, for example, July 21st, there's an article in Psychology Today titled The Emerging Problem of AI Psychosis: Amplifications of Delusions by AI Chatbots May Be Worsening Breaks with Reality. Or August 18th, there was an article in The Atlantic titled AI is a Mass Delusion Event. So one of the primary things that's being discussed is that issues with people who have mental health issues getting worse in some instances by AI. And part of the reason for that is that AI in user studies, it often gets rated more favorably when it agrees with the person. So as a result of that, a lot of the AI companies have created the AI chatbots over the past few years to agree with you more, even if the answer is wrong. So, as a result of that, the AIs are actually being designed to be more agreeable. But this is a huge problem when you run into people who are already suffering from delusions, and then all of a sudden they're being told that they're right, that those delusions are correct. And there have been a number of notable instances of that over the past month or two.
Yeah, and that shows this sort of reinforcement of bad. This reinforcement of delusions also demonstrates that another meaning for bubble, like bubble, is something that that is fragile, and it's something which is inflated and pops easily. But then we also talk about bubbles as a way as an alternate term for echo chambers, right? Like if if somebody lives in a particular part of Texas and they're like, well, everybody I know thinks this, but like, well, you live in a right wing bubble. Somebody from, I don't know, the Bay Area, you're like, oh, you live in a left wing bubble, right? These like bubbles are also these contained little echo chamber realities, where everybody's reinforcing things. So in this case, like we see AI being able to create a bubble around a person where all their dumb bullshit just keeps getting reinforced and, in some cases, eloquently justified by the machine in a way that a person, despite their best attempts at rationalization, could not do on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an issue also because in some instances it's a good inversion where sometimes your bubble, the reality distortion bubble needs to be popped. And sometimes you can see people having that experience, but then resisting it and saying, no, like the delusion is reality and this is real. And I'm not going to listen to those that are saying that it's not. And they have almost like a violent reaction to people trying to tell them that they're experiencing something that's a delusion. So that's like the flip side of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is major things. So good. That's our segment on the Saturn Neptune, but we'll return to that. Another major alignment that happened in August, of course, was the Mars Saturn opposition, just in and of itself and on its own. And one of the things that happened very, very close to the Mars Saturn opposition, which occurred on around August 8th and in the days leading up to and following that, and one of the major pieces of news in the US at that time was on August 11th, Trump announced that he was taking over the DC police and started militarizing the Capitol basically by deploying the National Guard there. And then subsequently said that he plans to do the same thing in other major cities like Chicago, New York, Seattle, Baltimore, San Francisco, and Portland. So one of the articles, for example, by Reuters on August 11th said, quote, Trump takes over DC police in extraordinary move, deploys National Guard in Capitol. So this was a huge event that kind of coincided pretty closely with the Mars Saturn opposition.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that I could see when because I was watching to see what types of newsworthy events would occur during the Mars Saturn. That was my number one on the list, and it does have the um, passive aggressive quality that we often see with Mars and Libra, because it was like, oh well, we're doing a national, we're sending we're militarizing, but it's for your own good, right? It wasn't like
Right.
an invasion, right? Mars Saturn together in Aries is like, um, we invade you, you lose. but the Mars Saturn, the Mars and Libra opposite the Saturn, also with that Neptune in there, right? Which is just sort of again blurs all the lines. It's like, oh no, it's for your own good, honey, right? It's like the manipulative conservatorship sort of energy, but writ large and much more disturbing in its implications.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for us as astrologers in the context of what we already know about the larger astrological context we've been talking about before of like the Pluto return of the United States and the setting up of the government when Pluto was in Aquarius, the Uranus return of the company that has of the country that's happened every time there's been a major conflict like the Civil War or World War II, and then finally the Neptune return back to where it was last time during the Civil War breaking out, for example. So, yeah, that is hugely problematic and disturbing, and we'll see how that unfolds in the future, but it's not looking great.
It's an escalation towards the whatever it is this time. Like
Yeah, the step towards the
what
conclusion of that.
yeah, or the peak polarization, which forces a more obvious and open conflict out on whatever realm or realms.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, you noticed in sort of turn with that, there was sometimes one of the things we talked about last month that can be tricky is that sometimes the Mars Saturn oppositions can be kind of like violent. And
Yeah.
you had noticed that there was one striking sort of violent event that occurred around that on August 10th, right?
Yeah, it was really sad. So it's with Mars Saturn, always interesting to check into the realm of Mars and people doing competitive or combat sports. And there was a report that a competitor at a jujitsu tournament, and big jujitsu tournament in Chicago, died shortly after his match. And it's worth noting that in jujitsu, no, you don't, nobody hits anybody. It's basically chess wrestling for nerds, and I mean that in a positive way. But it is not boxing. It's very rare to have serious injuries like that. And yeah, it was a middle-aged man who just started a couple years ago. It was his first tournament, and got done with his match, sat down in the bleachers, and passed away. Right on the Mars Saturn opposition.
Mm, wow. Yeah, that's really tragic.
Yeah, and then
Uh, and then there was another kind of weird violent event in that sphere as well this month.
yeah. Yeah, not bang on the Mars Saturn like as tightly as these other things, but very much within the orb, um, and very also speaking very strongly to the Saturn Neptune, what's real, what's fake. There was an incident at a pro wrestling show where a professional fighter who was there to support one of the wrestlers got into it with one of the wrestlers backstage, and then was brought into the ring as a way of like making it cool and making it part of the show, but then proceeded to actually brutally beat one of the wrestlers to the point of hospitalization in the middle of the show. And so we have the Mars Saturn violence, but we also have a lot of layers of Saturn Neptune. The crowd was very confused because a pro wrestling show has people simulating acts of violence, and even though they're not doing exactly what it looks like they're doing, it's their bodies moving around. People get banged up. There are various levels of how hard people go, and so it took everyone a second or several seconds to realize that someone was just being beat maybe to death in front of them. And so this is the bizarre sort of counterpoint to the bunnies on the trampoline, where you look at it, you're like, oh, well, that's got to be real. Everybody's looking at something real that's happening in the middle of a fake show. It's like, oh, well, that can't be real. This is a simulation. This is pretend. And so it's that same theme of not being able to tell what's real, but in a really like ugly, fucked up way.
Yeah, and there's like this one guy in the audience who's like another wrestler who also you can see in the video like him not being sure if this is real and if he needs to help, but then the moment he realizes that he needs to act, like he dives in and probably stops the other guy from being killed by pulling the guy that was freaking out off of him. And but then what was weird is in the clip, like the ref then continues the charade and then like gets down and like counts out like the end of the fight or something like that, as if that's what was supposed to happen. Or what do you call that when they do that at the end, the counting?
Yeah, whatever that is. I'm not a big pro wrestling guy, but yeah,
Mm.
very show must go on, like incorporating it back into the illusion. But yeah, like very, what a confusing and disturbing thing. And this was all, and what this was also live streamed by the young man Raja Jackson. He was live streaming his participation at the event, and him getting to go into the ring. And so, an additional layer of the confusion that appearances these days create is not only was it confusing for the people who were there live, but then you have the people watching his stream, and to what, like, is this a show? Is he actually doing that? Like layers and layers of confusion. In this case, hiding like the illusion, the idea of an illusion, hiding the real thing, which is the reverse of what we were talking about, but the complementary reverse of, oh, it's an illusion that looks real. And your aha moment is, oh, it's fake with the bunnies. They got me. Whereas you have the, oh my God, this is real with this incident.
Yeah. And then one guy having that realization in the moment and basically being a hero and like stopping it at the moment it needed to be stopped. So that's an
hopefully
interesting
saving
dynamic.
hopefully saving the wrestler from brain damage. I don't believe I don't believe any definitive statements about his long-term brain health have been issued, or it's possible to issue them, but certainly saving him from worse than what happened.
Mm,
And
yeah.
this is not very long ago, and so it's unclear whether the person, what Raja Jackson will be, what crime he will or won't be charged with, what the long term recovery looks like for the victim, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with that. Um, so, moving on to other news, this is just a throwaway, but it connects back with something last month, which is on August 19th, NASA announced that a new moon was discovered orbiting the planet Uranus using NASA's Webb telescope, and that this brings the number of moons around Uranus that are known to 29. And I thought this is amazing because remember, last month, Uranus just went back into Gemini, which I talked about in the last forecast, was the sign where Uranus was originally discovered. And a month ago, right after Uranus went into Gemini, they had announced that detected some new things that meant that Uranus was hotter than they thought it was, and that this might require them to send a new probe to it because it could be much different compositionally than they originally thought. So now all of a sudden, just a month later, there's been another new discovery involving the planet Uranus again when it moves back to the sign that it was originally discovered in the first place, which is Gemini. So I thought that was really fascinating from an astrological standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, completing another cycle and learning more. Yeah, learning more about Uranus. Do you remember what the discovery degree is, Chris?
No, not offhand,
Okay.
but I can look into that.
Yeah, it'd
Um,
be fun to just notice what's going on when we get to the discovery degree.
yeah, absolutely. In other news, that wasn't the Mars Saturn and the Saturn Neptune were not the only combinations this month, but the other thing that happened in August is we had the Venus Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, and that highly auspicious conjunction of those two benefics coming together. And one of the most notable pieces of news about that is Taylor Swift announced her engagement to Travis Kelce on August 26th. And this is really interesting because the day they announced it, my initial reaction as an astrologer was I thought it was kind of odd because I looked at the chart for that day and Venus had just gone into Leo and it was opposing Pluto in early Aquarius. So it was like the signature for their announcement chart was Venus opposite Pluto. But I was thinking about it and I remarked to Lisa, like maybe this is just the public announcement and maybe the actual proposal happened closer to the Venus Jupiter conjunction. And it later came out that the proposal was 2 weeks before the announcement. So they actually did. Travis Kelsey did propose to Taylor around the time of the Venus Jupiter conjunction, which means that the biggest celebrity marriage proposal of the year happened under that auspicious Venus Jupiter alignment, which I just cannot. That's so literal and such
Yeah.
an obvious thing. I can't think of a better example than that.
Yeah, that's about as good as it gets for examples. And she has her moon Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, so it was that Jupiter or during her Jupiter return, it's Venus conjoining Jupiter during her Jupiter return in what is a very auspicious part of her chart.
Yeah, and we don't have a for sure birth time for Taylor Swift, and there's actually a lot of very strong like arguments and debates about what her correct rising sign is. But I did notice that one of the proposed rising signs is Capricorn rising, and if that was true, then the Venus Jupiter conjunction would have taken place in her seventh house of marriage and partnership, which could be kind of an interesting argument in favor of the Capricorn rising chart. Although I'm sure there's a lot of other different, arguments you could make for different rising signs as well. But that did draw my attention. And the last thing I want to mention about that is just that the Venus went back into Leo when they announced it, and that reminded me of 2 years ago. This was them getting together was one of our Venus retrograde in Leo stories because that we talked about in a couple forecast episodes. Because what ended up happening was when Venus slowed down and stationed retrograde in Leo, I'm pretty sure that's when he first kind of like put it out there that he was interested in seeing her like on a podcast or something like that. But then when Venus retrograded and stationed direct square Jupiter, I think that was when they actually got together or when it was announced that they had gotten together and started dating. So it's an interesting like callback to that then they got together under Venus retrograde in Leo, and then they announced their engagement eventually under Venus coming back into Leo.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, Sorry, I want to look at one thing really quickly that I might be remembering correctly about her chart, that might make more sense out of the Venus Pluto. Yeah, okay. So Chris, as you probably suspected, Taylor and I have pretty much the same Venus.
Right.
They're about half a degree apart. And so that's Taylor has Venus at 155 Aquarius. I'm on like 235. And so she's had Pluto going over her Venus. And so I've been doing exactly that transit. Um, and although it's been kind of annoying at points, it's mostly been pretty okay. There have just been like these permanent shifts in relationships for me. Like for me, it was Lucian coming into the world, and so now Kate and I, our relationship has shifted because we are not only lovers and collaborators, but we are parents together, right? And so there have just been these really powerful, never going to be the same again shifts to the Venusian part of my life, to the relational part. That it's been hard at certain points because being parents challenging, blah blah blah. But I've been, I've been kind of excited to see what the permanent Plutonian changes are, and that they're not necessarily the result of some terrible underworld force. And so it's her getting married is going, and like having this relationship is no doubt been a transformative thing. So it's really interesting to see that, because that's a big change. And
Yeah, absolutely.
so the Venus being exactly opposite that natal Venus and on the Pluto actually makes some sense as a result of this slow Pluto over Venus transit, which has been happening really since she got together with Travis.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And well, and that was my reflection also later is like at the time actually when I was thinking about the Venus Pluto opposition the day of their engagement is like This is probably a really bad day for like a lot of Taylor Swift like stalkers and like people that are obsessed with her who have dreams of like marrying her one day or something like that, that she just got engaged. And in fact, that was some of the stories the next day, like on Reddit. There was like a subreddit, for example, of Taylor Swift fans who believed that she was gay, that she was a lesbian, or that she was bi, and who hoped that she would marry a woman someday. So a bunch of them were both either heartbroken or in some instances in denial and saying that maybe it was just a fake marriage and that it was just to like cover or something like that. Yeah. So that's another aspect of the Venus Pluto opposition and her announcement of her marriage is some of those things.
Right.
Um, I did notice that there's a fake, again, one of the times listed in Astra Databank is for the Leo rising version, but it appears to come from Astro Theme, and it appears to be another fake time that Astro Theme put forward that somehow got listed on Astro Databank, although Astro Databank cloaks it by just calling it a French website, but that's their keyword for Astro Theme. But ironically, so that means that there was a fake time put forward by Astro Theme that is then in Astro Databank, and ironically, that's how I first found out about Astro Theme inventing fake times was because they did that for Kanye West, where they claimed a time for him and then cited a magazine interview. But when I got the magazine, it didn't exist. And similarly for her, they cited a tweet, but when people looked for the tweet, it doesn't exist.
Hmm.
So that's 2 months in a row that we've seen fake times floating around from Astro Theme. Last month, it was one for Hulk Hogan that originated from them. This month, there's one for Taylor Swift. So, not to keep beating that drum, but this is like a major issue that we need to deal with at some point as a community. And I don't know what the answer is to it, but people should be aware of it. And I want people to be very careful about where they get their birth data from and like be careful about what the source is.
Beware of French websites bearing times. I don't know.
Well, and
Maybe,
maybe it's just
oh,
going back to the Saturn Neptune issue and just be aware
oh,
of
100%.
fake things.
Yeah, come on, Leo Rising. That feels like the laziest possible guess for a person that is a famous performer.
Right. Yeah. And
Also, is does that
could
put
be what it is.
that moon Jupiter in the 12th? I don't know. I don't think
Right.
that.
Yeah.
It makes me think of Kurt Cobain, who also had Moon Jupiter in Cancer, had it in the 11th. The 11th for a performer or artist will show their audience to a large degree, right? The groups of people who are excited about what they do. And,
Mhm.
Kurt Cobain has a huge loyal audience 30 plus, like 30 years after his death. So you can see that affecting like describing audience for him. I wonder, I'd be surprised if Taylor, who also has a gigantic and extremely loyal fan base, and has that same configuration, doesn't have that testifying to what's happening in the 11th, either by being present there or the moon or Jupiter perhaps ruling the 11th. But
Yeah. What
I've not gone down the electional rabbit or the rectification rabbit hole on that chart, but that's something that occurs to me.
yeah. When Cobain started his band with his high school friend Chris Novoselic, and that was a large part of that as well. Is he had a really good friend to start a band with.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all right, so that is we'll always remember this. I think it's really important. Some people I got a lot of stupid comments when I did a short video about this of like why are you talking about celebrities and this doesn't matter and everything else, but even if you don't care about this, obviously, it's incredibly striking that the most witnessed and viral and anticipated marriage proposal of recent times occurred within days of the Venus Jupiter conjunction in Cancer this year. And that's an incredibly piece of good astrology and something I think all of us will sort of remember and sort of take with us in our databases of, potentially good manifestations of certain types of alignments in very classical ways.
Yeah, it's a perfect fit, regardless of whether Taylor Swift is for you or not.
Right. All right, so that was the Venus Jupiter conjunction. And in other more personal news, the Venus Jupiter conjunction for me this month was also very important, where my partner Lisa had surgery for breast cancer this month. And that ended up happening in the middle of the month, a bit after the Mars Pluto opposition and a little bit around the Venus Jupiter conjunction. And Lisa's doing well, and she's in the process of like treatment and, resting and getting better from that. And she doesn't talk about her chart as much. So, but I can talk about it in the context of my transits, which were interesting as her partner. That obviously my chart was getting activated like crazy lately due to all of that. But there's two things that I wanted to mention. One of them was this partially showed up as the Mars retrograde, which happened in my seventh house of relationships and my sixth house of illness, where we first found out about this in April. And the moment I actually saved the chart for the moment that Lisa told me that something felt weird in one of her breasts, because the moment she told me that, the transits like fell into place and I immediately knew to take it seriously because it explained a transit that I had not understood up to that point, what it was doing in my chart. And it was that Mars retrograde that was happening since last fall in my seventh house of relationships and then retrograding the sixth house of illness. And what happened is it connected those topics. And that's why I've been talking about that as like a technique that I've really come to understand and develop over the course of the past year. Because when retrogrades cross two whole sign houses, it sometimes will directly connect the topics of those two adjacent houses, not just having events happening in parallel in both houses, but sometimes actually like overlapping and combining them in some unique way. So for me, it was, in the background with that Mars retrograde, my partner was developing an illness, and then we found out about it after Mars station direct and as it was making its way direct through those two houses. And then the other thing was what ended up happening was the Venus Jupiter conjunction itself happened in Cancer and in my sixth house. And what it ended up being was taking care of her, basically. And it gave me a lot of reflection about the sixth house and Cancer itself, and how having a Venus Jupiter that conjunction there was literally like taking care of somebody who was sick, and how this actually tied into a history of Venus Jupiter conjunctions at important turning points in our relationship. So that it was probably a recurrence transit because Lisa first emailed me and our first exchange together as like human beings happened the day of a Venus Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio many years ago, almost like 20 years ago now. And then Venus Jupiter conjunctions kept recurring at different points because when we got together in a relationship, by secondary progression, Venus conjoined Jupiter exactly in my chart
Mm.
when we started our relationship. Or like years later, we had broken up for a period of time, but then Venus went retrograde in my seventh house and conjoined Jupiter in my seventh house, and we got back together. That was also the same like month, Austin, that you and I started doing the forecasts together, the forecast episodes.
Yeah.
So the Venus Jupiter conjunction is also kind of important for me in my story in general, even outside of relationships, because then later, I started the podcast on a Venus Jupiter conjunction in Gemini back in 2012. Um, but yeah, so Venus Jupiter in the sixth house and the idea of like taking care of somebody, as well as that idea that we talked about earlier of Venus Jupiter going through Cancer, fixing something that was messed up or that got broken over the course of the past year when Mars was going through Cancer. So for me, it was taking care of her, and yeah, so far so good, and that was part of that transit for me.
Yeah. That's and really powerful. And it shows that with the Venus Jupiter, it does point to sometimes the best possible things that could happen, but it also means like trying to ameliorate, to remove suffering, to like absolutely minimize the negative, right? And being in that place of like work and service. And I'm sure you did absolutely everything you could think of to minimize what suffering Lisa was experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it gave me insight because I see that sometimes in the charts of doctors, of like doctors who work with sick people having important placements in their chart in like the sixth house or sometimes the 12th house. and that they manifest the beneficence of benefic placements or important placements like the ruler of the ascendant or the 10th through helping people in difficult positions, but that can happen in each of our personal lives as well in different ways.
Yeah.
So that was really insightful to me, as well as like a mixture of a Venus Jupiter conjunction story, as well as the Mars Saturn opposition, as well as everything else. So yeah, Lisa's recovering right now, but yeah, she appreciates all the well wishes for everyone. So thanks for everyone that sent in good thoughts and stuff, and hopefully she'll be back again soon, recording next month's electional astrology episode with me. All right. I think that's it for the news section, Austin. Shall we take a break?
I think we should.
All right, let's transition to talking about the forecast for September. So, one of the things that happens right away, the very first day of September, is that Saturn retrogrades back into the sign of Pisces and departs from Aries, where it's been since late May. So, on the one hand, we've had a 3 month preview of what Saturn is in Aries is about. But on the other hand, this month, the dominant theme in September is refocusing things back on the Pisces sector of our chart, not just with Saturn retrograding back into Pisces, where it's been transiting since March of 2023, but also because the very first eclipse that we have this month, which takes place on September 7th, is in the sign of Pisces. So that's going to give a huge amount of emphasis to the Pisces side of our chart, especially whatever whole sign house is that's activating. And I think, especially in the first part of the month, that's going to be part of the major feel for everybody, not just in a personal sense, but also in a mundane sense as well.
Yeah, it's we have an outer planet moving back into Pisces, and Saturn moves back on the first, and it will be there until February 13th. So we have almost about 5.5 months, almost a half a year of Saturn back in Pisces. After the disturbing and infuriating preview of Saturn's time in Aries, which lasted from May 26th until September 1st. Um, Ironically, or perhaps counterintuitively, I'm excited to see Saturn back in Pisces, even though it is the sign where I keep my sun and a couple other of my things. Um,
Yeah. I think you're going
I
to lose your Pisces membership. They're going to vote you out for that
Dude,
statement.
Saturn Pisces is fucking terrible. Or sorry, on Aries was fucking terrible.
Okay.
So one thing that is not based solely on my opinions and tastes, but that's very important to note about Saturn leaving Aries is it's not just going back to the sign that it's in, it is breaking the tight connection that it had with Neptune.
Mm,
Since it went into Aries, it is breaking the almost perfect sextile that it had with Uranus newly ingressed into Gemini, as well as the sextile to Pluto. Saturn in Aries was aspecting Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto in their new positions, right? Which they will be holding for quite some time. And so Saturn was really Saturn. It was not just Saturn in Aries; it was Saturn in Aries making real the difficulties of all these things, of all these new patterns. Which are going to be with us for a minimum of 7 years, but in many cases up to like 2040. And so Saturn in Pisces is not just going back to the old, like, oh, before May, it's like going back to before this whole future arc started. And so that's really important. Like it's we can also see it, I think, meaningfully as finishing up these old arcs, all of this end of Pisces stuff.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think especially people that were having a hard time or where there were difficult things coming up over the past few months since late May with Saturn going into the Aries sector of their chart, I think are going to be surprised at feeling the sort of weight lifted off of their shoulders of having that energy removed from that part of their chart for a brief period of time for the next several months until what, early next year? When's it go
Yeah,
into Pisces?
it's the eve of Valentine's Day, so it's February
Mm,
13th.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That'll be a good Valentine's Day gift on February 14th of 2026. But
Yeah. First full
yes,
day of Saturn back in Aries. You're welcome.
yeah. So it's like on the one hand, so for example, people that have Saturn in Aries have been experiencing what their Saturn return is going to be like over the past few months since late May, but they're suddenly going to have that alleviated for a period of time. Whereas the people that have been going through their Saturn return for the past 2 years since March of 2023, they have unfinished business that they need to go back and return to, and they may feel a heaviness that comes back that had disappeared over the course of the past few months, but it's because there's some things that need to be finished up. And that's going to be emphasized even more because we also have the eclipse taking place in Pisces very early in the month as well, that we're already in the middle of eclipse season once the month opens. And the eclipse energy is bringing in this energy of, always use the keywords of major beginnings and major endings in that sector of your life. So that's adding an even stronger emphasis to that part of your chart, and that there's going to be some things that are ending in the Pisces sector of our life. And there's going to be, though, out of that, some new things that are also beginning.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of old and a lot of new, and a lot of the new perhaps growing out of the old in Pisces. And it's just it is just it's a very elementally we're it's a very different mixture. We've had a lot of things in fire and air over the summer, especially a lot of fire, and this is a lot of water. And it is a mixed bag. Another thing about this Pisces emphasis, that the full moon, which is due to be eclipsed in Pisces, gives us is it also puts a spotlight on what Jupiter in Cancer is doing. Jupiter is the ruler of Pisces. It's in a water sign as well. And the moon in Pisces, the moon rules Cancer. Jupiter's in Cancer. Jupiter rules Pisces. The full moon slash eclipse is in Pisces. And so we have a really powerful mutual reception between the moon and Jupiter on this eclipse, as well as Saturn having come back to Pisces to be part of the important doings there. And so, yeah, very different quality. Just note the like the return to the water themes, both good, bad, and other, because we have the greater malefic Saturn return to Pisces. We have the greater benefic Jupiter in excellent position to oversee things in Pisces. And so it's not this like fast, frantic, breakneck, stupid pace that Saturn in Aries was setting. This is like slower and deeper. And when it's bad, it's that like slow, deep, what did I call it? When we were talking about Saturn and Pisces years ago, it was like the undersea, like the Leviathan of depression, right? Like the sad sea serpent far beneath the waves. Different, like even though it's not necessarily, it's not that Saturn and Pisces doesn't bring some negative things, but it's very different in quality and pace than Saturn and Aries. If you can remember, yeah, the sadness dragon that lives under the ocean.
Sadness Dragon. I like that. That's a good one. Um, yeah, so the Sadness Dragon, we're returning back to that from the past few years, from March of 2023 through May of 2025. And let me share the graphic again that Madeline DeCoates from honeycomb.co made us for the eclipses. And because even though the eclipse takes place on September 7th, what I found last year in the intense bit of eclipse research that I did, that eclipse season really starts about 7 days before the eclipse actually takes place. So that means our window is opened already as soon as September opens. And we're going to be seeing a lot of major things happening in the news. One of the things that we always see during eclipse season is prominent figures, that there's a pivot with prominent figures. And we're going to see some people on their way up suddenly and being thrust into the limelight. And we're going to see other people suddenly on their way down and being like knocked down from a high position and running into troubles or difficulties or other things like that, because eclipses fundamentally, one of the things they've always been traditionally associated with is the rise and fall of powerful and prominent people. So that's going to be one of our keywords for eclipse season. But the other thing that's happening around the same time of this eclipse, very closely, that's going to tinge it with its nature, is that Uranus is stationing retrograde in Gemini for the very first time the day before the eclipse on September 6th. So that energy is also going to be very potent for that entire week. And one of the things that we've seen repeatedly over the past several years is that the first time that an outer planet makes a retrograde station after entering into a new sign of the zodiac acts as an exclamation mark and a very loud announcement, where usually there's some sort of singular event that takes place that encapsulates and perfectly describes the energy of what that entire transit of that outer planet is going to be like through that sign for however many years it's going to happen. So, for example, going back to Saturn in Pisces, it ingressed into Pisces in March of 2023, but the first time that it stationed retrograde in that sign was in June of 2023. And within days of that, that's when the Titan submersible submarine disaster happened, where there was like this group of people in a submarine by the Titanic that got stuck and the thing imploded. But for like a week, everybody thought that they were trapped down there. And it was leading to all this discourse about how terrible it would be to be like trapped underneath the ocean and hopelessness and everything else. So we have some sort of parallel happening here, except about Uranus and Gemini and what that transit is about on a major, like macro level in terms of mundane events and things like the Uranus return of the United States and other things like that, but also on an individual level, thinking about what sign and what whole sign house Uranus just went into in your chart, and how this is going to be a major turning point for understanding what that's going to be about for you personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you have thoughts about what Uranus's time in Gemini is going to do and what the themes might be, keeping an eye on Uranus at this time. And it might be a little bit difficult to disentangle from everything else churned up by the eclipse, but the Uranus station stuff's going to be in there. And yeah, macro, like the tech stuff and the this period of history in the United States and what is unfolding are quick top two keep an eye on. And so,
Yeah.
Chris, you and I both came to a very independently came to a very similar, I believe, conclusion about this eclipse, where at first we saw the moon in a Jupiter ruled sign in an applying trine to Jupiter and in mutual reception with Jupiter in a good place. And we're like, hey, maybe this isn't going to be so bad. Like that's a nice set of connections. And
I'm gonna put the
then
I'll put the chart right up right now while you're talking.
okay, great. Anyway, like this seems like though dragons complicate things, there's a lot of good Jupiter here. But we both also saw that Mars is still square Jupiter very tightly, right? Sticking, undermining, interfering with, undercutting some of the good potentials, and then added to that the Uranus station, which is good, bad, and other, but we you can't predict that it will be generally favorable for the human. It might be, it might not be. It'll probably be a mixed bag. And so they're very mixed testimony. And then, of course, Saturn having regressed back into Pisces. This eclipse is not right next to Saturn, but it does share the sign with it, and that can't meaningfully be ignored. And so it's a really mixed bag.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break it down. Um, Let's break it down. We got a Pisces eclipse. So this is happening very close to our first tense aspect of the month, which is that Mars Jupiter square. And on the one hand, I always think of a few years ago, there was that Mars Jupiter square when there was that explosion in Beirut, where it was like this huge explosion that took place and part of it was like filmed, and it happened very close to a Mars Jupiter square because that's such a literal manifestation of like large explosion when you put Mars and Jupiter together. So on the one hand, there can be some negative energy to that when Mars is empowered and it's made bigger and made more powerful than it could be otherwise. But on the other hand, sometimes there can be some really positive things from Mars Jupiter aspects as well. It can be very enterprising. It can favor like bold action and action that becomes successful by being decisive. What other
Yeah. It,
Mars Jupiter things do you come up with keyword wise?
um, well, so I mean, when Mars Jupiter are together and cooperating, there are a lot of pretty good. It can be especially good for Mars, right? When Jupiter is supporting Mars,
Hmm.
you often get, you get success, you get wisdom in action, or a bigger, you get action but with within the context of a broader, more strategic, intelligent plan. This this particular square, I don't think, is going to tend to bring out the best in their potential combinations. Um, but some people might get some of that where you have Jupiter just supporting Mars. Mars tends to, in my experience, Mars tends to interfere with Jupiter more. Jupiter doesn't interfere with Mars as much as Mars interferes with Jupiter. If you've been especially enjoying and maybe even depending on the beneficence of Jupiter's time in Cancer, this square might be annoying. I've been seeing Mars stuff like little conflicts and disagreements, threatening to undercut what were generally positive developments that people have been experiencing with Jupiter and Cancer. One, again, some may get something just positive out of it. A number of people will probably successfully prevent whatever itching, burning, irritating Marshall things from actually damaging their ongoing happy Jupiter transit. And then some people will experience Mars like fucking up or seriously undermining what otherwise looked like it was going well with Jupiter in Cancer.
Yeah, because Jupiter is trying to concept of exaltation is like being the best at something or doing something at a very high level. And in Cancer, especially, Jupiter is attempting to nurture or take care of things. But from Jupiter's perspective, with this transit, we're getting the experience of something irritating or cutting that's coming in and not just casting aspersions at Jupiter, but also cutting down its ability to help and nurture things more than it would otherwise as a result of that square. But on the other hand, one of the nice things this month, and one of our most positive aspects, is that both of the benefics, once you get out of the exact degree based square between Mars and Jupiter, once you start getting past like September 4th and 5th and 6th, is Venus starts moving into a sextile with Mars with reception, and then Jupiter is still overcoming Mars, which gets better once it starts moving out of that exact degree based aspect. So, for example, this is one of my most positive aspects of the month when Venus makes this exact sextile with Mars from like 25 degrees of Leo to 25 degrees of Libra around September 15th. And at that point, I think Mars will be successfully held in check and made much better in some ways in what it's doing in Libra for some individuals through that counteraction of the benefics having the upper hand for a brief period of time before we get to the second eclipse and Mars squares Pluto, and then things just go kind of crazy again. But this brief period where Mars is squaring Jupiter exactly around the time of the first eclipse, it does seem like Mars is in the brief position of having the upper hand and the ability to cut down and degrade what Jupiter is trying to accomplish in Cancer, which is clean up the mess that Mars made in Cancer earlier that year.
Yeah, which is most yeah, and is super significant because Jupiter is the ruler of the eclipse in Pisces, right? And Jupiter
Right.
would like it to be as night would like it to be a happy dragon, that maybe is distributing treasure. Maybe the that very jolly dog dragon from the Never-Ending Story. That's a pretty Jupiterian dragon. But
Mm.
there are other things going on, and so mixed bag. Um,
Yeah, and with Uranus being so loud during this time, just things that are unexpected, like sudden, that are disruptive and come out of nowhere and that you can't anticipate is part of the order of the day with Uranus stationing there. And you had mentioned some of the things going on, but we should reiterate like basic Gemini significations of like things having to do with communications, with travel, especially short distance travel, like in mundane astrology in the world, there'll probably be some crucial turning point with respect to some of the automation of like travel with automated cars around the cities that takes place around this station, especially.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, transportation and communication are huge Gemini things.
Okay, so Pisces eclipse, major beginnings, major endings, Saturn returning back into Pisces energy. We've been experiencing a lot over the past few years, but in some instances, like I've seen people that have Pisces placements where there's been something that's been building up in the background over the past 2 years, but it's about to really come to the forefront. And the fact that this is a lunar eclipse where normally it's like a full moon that's shining light in that area. It may be bringing to light some things that have been building in the background as Saturn's been moving through Pisces since March of 2023 that suddenly can't be ignored or suddenly become much more obvious than they were previously.
Yeah, and that's the interesting and maybe even ironic part of eclipses is that while the eclipse is happening, you don't see the light that you should be seeing. But what you do see in people's lives are things that have been latent or invisible or hidden come into the field of vision. It's like you can't see the visible, but now the invisible becomes something you can see, which of course is true in a literal sense with a solar eclipse in the middle of the day. If it's intense enough, you can see the stars during the daytime. And even though that isn't literally true with a lunar eclipse, because you can already see the stars, that dynamic of being oriented towards what has been invisible or hidden or latent or unconscious is still there, right? And I think that's a nice point, Chris, that there's been stuff building in Pisces, and the ruler of Pisces, like Jupiter, is in a really strong position now, and Saturn had to go back to Pisces to finish something up. So will Neptune in a month and a half. I like what you're seeing there with that eclipse stirring that stuff up. Those
Yeah,
not quite realized potentials that have nonetheless been building for a while.
yeah, because especially there's some people, for example, that had their Saturn or other things earlier in Pisces, and they got the most intense part of their Saturn return out of the way early on. But there were others that had it late in the sign, and so they've had one exact pass, but there's a couple more exact passes coming over the next several months as Saturn comes back to about 25 degrees of Pisces and moves through those degrees a few times here over the next several months. So for some of those people, there's something that's been building, but the culmination of which hasn't fully happened yet. But having Saturn come back and then an eclipse there at the same time can certainly trigger the sequence of events then that starts unfolding. Although I guess we should situate the eclipses in that context because this eclipse series actually started 1 year ago in the what was it, September of 2024, when we had our first eclipse in Pisces. Then we had a Virgo eclipse in March, which is the next step into that series, and this is the first time that we get the full set of eclipses in Pisces and Virgo. But for some people, what we're in then is the next phase in a sequence and an unfolding of events that started last fall or 1 year ago during the first eclipse in Pisces that's now going to accelerate into the next phase here under this eclipse.
Yeah, and so this being the first eclipse season where we get a Pisces and a Virgo right next to each other, will make whatever the themes that you've noted over the last year yeah, whatever themes seem to have been connected with the nodes having ingressed into Pisces and Virgo, and one eclipse here and one eclipse there. This should make it super obvious, both for the collective as well as for individuals. This is our first like full no holds barred Pisces Virgo eclipse season.
Yeah. And this is also then the first time that you'll see that dynamic that's so unique with eclipses where you have two houses being activated in the chart that are diametrically opposite and therefore usually are completely separate parts of the life. But all of a sudden you have these major beginnings and endings that start happening in both areas that sometimes tie them together in unique ways when those two houses aren't normally connected. So, for example, like in this chart that I just have up this random time, the eclipse is taking place in the fourth house of the home and the living situation and the 10th house of career. And normally those would be separate areas, but for some people, having them take place in those two houses, they're going to have some major changes at home that may be tied in with major changes that are happening in their career, where, for example, like you get a new job, but it forces you to move across the country, or vice versa, where you have some major change at home with your living situation or your parents that necessitates a change in terms of your job and your career.
Yeah. Yeah, one forces the other, forces the other. You get a feedback loop between the nodes and between the eclipses. And
Yeah.
again, like that started a year ago, but we haven't had a chance to see it really clearly just operating one after another like we will this month.
Yeah, like a year ago, it was the Pisces house. Then in March, it was the Virgo house, and now it's both. Can we quickly run through the other houses? Because you had some good ones recently when we went through the oppositional pairs of houses. So, first house and seventh house, for example, you see people going through major changes with relationships versus their self identity. And so, for example, sometimes it's like, you have a relationship ending that your identity was very tied up in. So then all of a sudden you have to like re identify or redevelop your sense of self and who you are outside of relationships.
Right. Or I'm going through these changes. I'm finding out that like I've discovered this person that I am absolutely becoming, and I'm not sure how to reconcile this person I'm becoming with my relationship, right? And it throws the two into dialogue and potentially crisis. And some of the serpentine or draconic symbolism is useful here when you think of snakes shedding skin, right? And
Mm,
having to go through a very uncomfortable yeah, an uncomfortable and sometimes paralyzing or immobilizing period of renewal where there are like changes happening within, you don't exactly understand it, but you need to crawl into a hole and shed the skin.
absolutely. And sometimes the changes are actually happening with your partner, like they're going through some
Hmm.
major transformative changes, but then somehow that has this indirect effect of you having to think about, your own identity and challenging your sense of self. Like, there was a couple of people actually recently that had examples of like first house, seventh house activations where one of them, their partner, they were in a lesbian relationship, and then their partner transitioned and became trans, and then it caused this like self-identity conflict with the person because they'd always been in a same-sex relationship and now they weren't, and going through a process with
Hmm.
that. And it was a really interesting, like unique manifestation of that. But there's many different like combinations of how changes with your partner can sometimes then affect you and your sense of self-identity.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, you have that. Um, you have that teeter totter in the seventh in all the houses, but it's so clear in the seventh and first.
Absolutely. All right. So then the second house and the eighth house often ends up being the material and financial axis, where sometimes there can be like a change in your partner's finances where let's say they lose a job or maybe they get a new job, and then that indirectly impacts your finances if you start thinking about how you make money and what your financial situation is, and if you should work as much, if they're making all the money, or in some instances, if they lose a job and suddenly you have to pick up the slack by bringing in more income.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the teeter totter, but bars of gold are being stacked on both sides, rather than human bodies. Also, I see a lot of debt and inheritance. I see
Yeah.
people be like, oh, I need some money, so I'm going to borrow a lot of it, which is connecting the second and eighth, or a period where, oh, I'm finally going to pay off all that debt, as well as inheritance, right? Which is, it was somebody else's eighth, but now it moves over to mine second.
Yeah, absolutely. The inheritance is like one of the most clear ways that there can be like a transfer from eighth house showing up of other people's resources or money, and second house and your own.
Yeah, that and literally paying your taxes is a second eighth house transfer that goes the other way that we all should be doing.
Yeah, should be doing. Alternatively, when you're not doing it and you get in trouble, that is one way that it can get activated as well.
Well, the I am terrified of the imagined consequences of not paying my taxes exactly. So I'm always very excited to give the government money.
Nice. As I think that's a shared experience we can
It's
all
it's it's my
relate.
don't hurt me, bro payment.
Right. All right, so that's the second house. Eighth house. Moving on, the next combination is the third house and the ninth house, where
Yeah.
sometimes you can go through some major transformations in terms of your education or your beliefs about the world, which can be like religious, but it can also be like political or other things like that. And sometimes that can impact like the way that you talk to other people or the way you communicate in the world in general.
Yeah, that's like the big shifts in perspective that we see in the eighth being tied into how you talk about things, who you hang out with, et cetera, is a big third ninth thing. Another third ninth thing that I see, I have nodes in the third ninth, and I'm having my opposition in third ninth now with these, is how prioritized short term projects, like what's the weekly schedule look like? What am I going to get done this month? Third house versus like long term big projects. Ninth is like, what do I want to accomplish before ninth is like bucket list, or what do I want to accomplish before my second Saturn return? Those, that kind of planning and aspiration where you look to the horizon of, from whatever age you are, you look to the horizon, you're like, well, when you're a teenager, by the time I'm 30, I would like to. And so a shifting of priorities is something that you often see with eclipses in third ninth. We're like, oh, I've been dreaming about this long term stuff, but really I need to get to work on this third house stuff. Or like I've been too much caught up in the mix and the rat race, and I need to like reaffix my eyes to the horizon and think about long term goals, which of course will mean that you're going to do short term daily prioritization differently. But that, like, those two time frames of aspiration and goal orientation is a huge thing I see with third and ninth.
Absolutely. Yeah. There can also just be this is the mobility axis, both with long distance travel with the
Yep.
ninth house, as well as interaction with foreign countries and for people from foreign places compared to what you grew up with, and the third house and getting around your local environment, including your neighborhood and your city, and how sometimes there can be changes happening with both of those, which can indicate like taking a major trip abroad, or sometimes major changes in terms of your ability, your mobility, and your ability to get around your home city.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Two more axes. One of them is the fifth house, 11th house. And you actually had a good one for this last month, but I had an example of this that somebody had for me recently where they started attending new groups and making new friends using it like a hobby that they were interested in, and they started like attending conferences and local meetings related to that hobby. But then all of a sudden they met somebody that they got into a romantic relationship with that started as kind of like a low level fling, activating the fifth house, and then turned into like a broader like romantic thing.
That's nice. Yeah, the one of the things I noticed like I don't know, a decade ago with Fifth 11th is for people who are creative professionals or aspiring creative professionals or even outside of that. Like the fifth house is the stuff that you create, and the 11th house is the people that can see it. And so the
Mm,
11th has a lot to do with audience. And the fifth is what you're making, right? Which those two, of course, are not the same thing, but are intimately tied together. And I've read charts for a bunch of creative professionals where, like, for example, during one set of eclipses, this was North Node 5th, South Node 11th. They're like, oh, I need to go into hiding and remove myself from my audience so that I can work on a thing so that I have something for them. Right. And then
mm.
I've also seen the converse many times where it's like, oh, I need to stop hiding from people and just working on something. And I need to let people see what I've been spending all of my creative energy on. Um,
Definitely. Definitely. And then, primary significations and most literal of the fifth house is children, as well as sometimes topics related to sex and sexuality. And then the 11th house is the house of friends and groups, and just major beginnings and major endings in both of those areas can just come up in different ways, sometimes independently when you have eclipses in that axis, and sometimes in ways that cross over in like interesting ways. Like there was one person I talked to months ago where their child, I think, graduated from school, but all of their friends were connected with like their kids like friend group or something like that. So it was going to completely change the social dynamic of the person and the type of social circles they were moving in because of this ending of one chapter in their child's life and the beginning of another.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that's such a thing. Like, having recently become a parent, I mean, last year, right? Um, the degree to which that changes your 11th house, like somebody's like, hey, do you want to meet up for lunch? I was like, no, we don't have a babysitter. You can come over, right? And we
Mm,
can hang out, but like I'm watching Lucian. Um
right.
like I no, I can't do that. And then suddenly your friends that already have kids become much more interesting because you're like, oh my God, you know how to do this. Like how to like the your social orientation has to change when you have children, and that's really interesting to think about on the other side, right? Oh, the kids are off to college, and now you have to reorient again. But yeah, the fifth and 11th being opposing but deeply intertwined on that child friends axis is that's a great call.
Yeah, absolutely. So, major beginnings and major endings when it comes to friends and friendship, and major beginnings and endings when it comes to children can often be a major topic of eclipses in those houses. And finally, we move on to the last axis, which is when eclipses fall in the sixth house, 12th house axis. And for me, this is primarily the health axis, where I especially see the sixth house pertaining to physical health and things that it takes to maintain your physical health or to fix things when something goes wrong with your physical health. Whereas the 12th house especially pertains to mental health and what it takes when sometimes you're going through a period of bad mental health versus other periods where you're focusing on that area more and you're trying to expend more effort to improve your mental health for some reason, such as like, starting to see a therapist or something like that. But having major beginnings and major endings when it comes to that axis can be common.
Yeah. So yeah, I also do physical and mental health for sixth and 12th. I also do one thing I also see is especially with eclipses, there is um, visible versus concrete, or excuse me, invisible versus visible problems, or concrete versus abstract problems, which often coincides with physical and mental, but is not exactly the same. Like sometimes, like I've seen people who've been suffering from a physical ailment that was undiagnosable. Then, when the sixth house is pinged, it moves from the 12th, where it was like this nebulous affliction, to being a very clear thing. And then I also see people dealing with a physical thing, right? Like I keep having this problem with my foot, and then being and having an aha moment where they're like, oh, actually, I keep hitting my foot because of this, let's say, mental or emotional pattern. Like, oh, it's because I keep doing this thing for these reasons, I don't know, connected to this thing that happened when I was 5. And that's why this physical thing keeps happening. But things
Mm,
exchanging between the clear physical and diagnosable, and the mysterious or mentally or spiritually caused, but like things pinging back and forth between those two.
I love that. Yeah, that's perfect. Let's see. Other things, the 12th house is also, it can be traditionally enemies or people that you don't get along with, where sometimes there's just people in your life that either you don't get along with for whatever reason, or sometimes people that actively try to do something that's harmful for you and going into a new chapter of like beginning some major turning point with respect to that, or sometimes ending something that's taken place there. And conversely, the 12th house can be your workplace and dealing with things in
Hmm.
your workplace as a major beginning or ending. Sometimes when those are tied together, it can be like somebody you're not getting along with in the workplace and some major turning point with respect to those. The 12th house, finally, I've been seeing a lot of just examples lately of the 12th house and seclusion being like the major topic, both as a sometimes a greater need for seclusion and sometimes the helpful or like healing potential sometimes of isolating yourself and going to places of seclusion can be one of actually the benefits of the 12th house, even though seclusion can sometimes have negative connotations as well, like places of seclusion like hospitals or even like prisons.
Yeah. The word that I tend to use for the positive, potentially healing seclusion, is retreat. And I see people going on
Mm,
retreats with big 12th, good 12th house stuff. And I think
nice.
that there's a very nice pairing and contrast to be drawn between like workplace sixth house and going on a retreat, or the negative version of a retreat, which is also a 12th house classic, is going to the hospital, which is also it's outside of the normal flow of life. You're definitely not going to work when you're at the hospital, but sometimes that too is necessary. But it's like out it's both like a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat, as well as a stay at the hospital, or a mental hospital. Like those are those are meaningfully opposed to going to work.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes that being okay and like understanding that there's periods in which you are forced to be less active so that you can heal and get better from something, and going through a period, especially for like highly active people, sometimes going through a period of rest and recovery and retreat can be a little bit foreign to what they're used to, but sometimes necessary in order to eventually reemerge, in good shape.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We need, and also to get perspective, getting outside of your life for a little bit is a really good way to get perspective on what that life is.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah,
And then last thing, go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
I was going to say, just last thing about the 12th house is I've seen some real instances of people dealing with mental health issues that were struggling with 12th house things and the importance of getting help when you need it. And I just wanted to really stress that because I've seen some instances of people not getting help when they needed it lately that were struggling with 12th house issues versus talking to people who did get help when they were struggling with 12th house mental health things and the huge difference that it makes in terms of the constructiveness of getting some help from somebody who actively wants to help you like navigate through those things can make a world of difference.
Yeah, it sure can.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a bit of an unplanned digression, and we've never done that before, but that was amazing. Thanks for going through that with me because the reason we did that is because that's going to be applying to this entire month, not just the first eclipse where we have the Pisces eclipse in the first 2 weeks of September, but then it also applies to the second 2 weeks of September where we have the Virgo eclipse, which we haven't fully looked at the details of yet, but
Coisa linda, gostosa, tipo modelo e chama atenção. Joga beijinho, instiga, sabe conquistar meu coração. Coisa linda, gostosa, tipo modelo e chama atenção. Joga beijinho, me instiga, sabe conquistar meu coração. Se eu tô em casa, ela vem me ligando e eu fico louco por essa menina. Faz um convite pra curtir uma praia ou dar um mergulho na minha piscina. Deixei o Xandão na mesa, hoje é dia de brindar. A felicidade veio, nem precisei ir buscar. Pegando um solzinho gostoso, perdi a linha pra ela. Pediu um bronzeador e mandou eu passar nela. Ela entende como luxo essa grande diversão, mas se fosse outra qualquer, enxergava ostentação. Coisa linda, gostosa, tipo modelo e chama atenção. Joga beijinho, me instiga, sabe conquistar meu coração. Coisa linda, gostosa, tipo modelo e chama atenção. Joga beijinho, me instiga, sabe conquistar meu coração. Se eu tô em casa, ela vem me ligando e eu fico louco por essa menina. Faz um convite pra curtir uma praia ou dar um mergulho na minha piscina. Deixei o Xandão na mesa, hoje é dia de brindar. A felicidade veio, nem precisei ir buscar. Pegando um solzinho gostoso, perdi a linha pra ela. Pediu um bronzeador e mandou eu passar nela. Ela entende como luxo essa grande diversão, mas se fosse outra qualquer, enxergava ostentação. Coisa linda.
atenção. Ela é terrível. Ela não anda, ela desfila. Ela é top, capa de revista. É a mais. Ela arrasa no look, tira foto no espelho pra postar no Facebook. Ela não anda, ela desfila. Ela é top, capa de revista. É a mais. Ela arrasa no look, tira foto no espelho pra postar no Facebook. Ela não anda.
Oh, no worries, bro. No worries, man.
Ela é top, capa de revista. É a mais. Ela arrasa no look, tira foto no espelho pra postar no Facebook. Ela é terrível.
Yo, brother, that's okay, man. You were outweighted. I think he was heavier than you too, right? No worries, man. That's sick, dude. Yo, mad respect for fighting an experienced adult boxer, man. Respect to you, bro. What's up, Boxing Glove? Thanks for being here, man. I know I have a 24-hour follow before chat. I appreciate your patience. I saw you followed 2 days ago, so I appreciate your patience. I do that to avoid what's called bots and fucking troll people, you know. I trained karate. I've sparred in karate. I guess I've karate sparred. I haven't really boxed, but I boxed against the bag a bunch. But yo, what's up, man? What's up, dude? What's up, dude? Thanks for being here, man. Thank you for being here, brother.
Quando estava triste o meu coração, eu fui para um...
Explosão do funk. Topfunk.net.
do fundamento. Humildade. Disciplina. Humildade, disciplina. Sem neurose, sem caô. A festa vai começar porque o papai chegou. 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 O Senhor é meu pastor. Aquecimento global, gatinhas. Irmãos, eu não vou falar muito.
Com vocês, o rei do funk, Mr. Catra!
Apaixonado.
Jura?
Que rabo, que rabão, que rabo, que rabão, que rabão, que rabão, que rabão, que rabão.
Joga na minha cara, muito louca, que beleza. Já que eu tô gostosa, coisa linda, que princesa. Rebola e delícia, ui, tô acesa. Eu sou sua rainha, mas gosto.
Vai começar a putaria! A partir desse exato momento não existe mais brabo na casa. A partir desse exato momento, quem manda nessa porra são as meninas gostosas. A festa é de vocês, hein? Rapaziada, deixa as meninas, por favor. Então, com toda a classe, com todo estilo.
Atenção pro blackout com desvio.
Humildade de eu. Vamos começar do jeito certo, do jeito que tem que ser. Vamos começar do jeito certo, do jeito que tem que ser. É assim, ó. What you gonna play now? Bobby, I don't know. But whatsoever I play, it's got to be funky. Yeah.
Quer dançar, o Tigrão vai te ensinar. Quer dançar, o Tigrão. Vou te dar muita pressão, então martela, martela, martelo, martelão. Levante a mãozinha na palma da mão. É o bonde do Tigrão, então martela, martela, martelo, martelão. Levante a mãozinha na palma da mão. É o bonde do Tigrão. Quer dançar, o Tigrão vai te ensinar. Quer dançar, o Tigrão vai te ensinar. Quer dançar, o Tigrão vai te ensinar. Quer dançar, o Tigrão vai te ensinar.
Rainha do funk, poderosa. Olhar de diamante nos envolve, nos fascina. Agita o salão.
De fogo e o calor tá de matar. Vai ser na praia da Barra que uma moda eu vou lançar.
Vai me enterrar na areia?
Não, vou atolar.
Vai me enterrar na areia?
Não, vou atolar.
Tô ficando atoladinha, tô ficando atoladinha, tô ficando atoladinha.
Calma, foguentinha.
Tô ficando atoladinha, tô ficando atoladinha, tô ficando atoladinha.
Calma, foguentinha.
Tô ficando atoladinha, atoladinha, tô ficando.
As popozudas, o baile todo. Pula, sai do chão, esse é o bonde do Tigrão.
Vai começar a puta. Porra, são as meninas. Agora, hein? Uma aquecidinha rápida.
Mixagem. DJ.
Não tinha que levava, não era legal, tinha vivido o passado no escuro e o presente era sem futuro. Independente de tudo, queria ser feliz, viver sem preconceito no seu próprio país. Mas mas entre a sociedade não obteve respeito. E cada dia que passava aumentava o preconceito. E se sentiu fracassado, perdeu razão de viver. E já não se importava em ser feliz ou sofrer. E perguntavam a si mesma onde foi que eu errei pra carregar na vida o mal que herdei. Tô cansado de tentar achar as respostas, e todos que se diziam amigos viraram as costas. E sua vida se tornou um grande tormento, até que ele colocou Jesus no seu pensamento. E a partir daquele dia sua vida mudou. Ele encontrou a alegria, ele encontrou o amor, ele encontrou tranquilidade que faltava no lar. Ele aceitou Jesus, falta vocês aceitar. Encontro cachoeirinha, amor, cutia, gambá. Já aceitaram Jesus, falta você aceitar. Vem boleiro, vem formiga, vem campi, pomba, fubá. Já aceitaram Jesus, falta você aceitar. Batomus, Abarão, Merque de Jacarepaguá. Já aceitaram Jesus, falta você aceitar. Nova Brasília, a fé, Chatubiá, gambá. Já aceitaram Jesus, falta você aceitar. Vigário, Vila Ideal, dois irmãos, cidade alta. Já aceitaram Jesus, falta você aceitar. Com muita fé em Deus, paramos por aqui. Eu, Catra, o fiel, eu, Duda, MC. Que todos sejam iluminados pelo justo do céu. Eu, Duda, MC. Eu, Catra, o fiel.
Liberdade para todos nós, DJ! Oi, demorou para balar! Oi, demorou para balar! Oi, demorou para balar! Chega de ser violento e deixar a pared nascer. Banqueiro, sangue bom, somos embora até morrer. Se liga, minha gente, é o que nós vamos falar. É de um morro tão querido e a letra vão abalar. Lá no Borel, amiga, é união, paz e amor. Quem for na comunidade vai dizer pra gente abalou. É o morro mais humilde do bairro Tijucão, porque meus amigos, nós somos todos irmãos. Lá é como uma família, é gente de montão. No morro e na favela só tem gente, sangue e pão. Porque meus amigos, lá na comunidade, nós fazemos festas em troca de amizade. E uma dessas festas é para os morros, sangue e pão, para poder fazer a amizade com outros irmãos. Lá, 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 oh, lá, 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 oh.
É apenas diferente porque nesse mundo está cheio de ambição. Mas eu sei que o nosso bonde é
Aí, cidadão, e o arrego?
Qual é, chefia? De novo? Pô, tá maluco?
Com esse salário tá brabo, né?
Quer din-din? Então vende o X9 pra mim. Tá ligado? Tá ligado, hein? Se faz de amigo só pra escotar, sujeito safado tem que apanhar por causa
quente e hoje eu tô fervendo. Que ela veio quente e hoje eu tô fervendo. Quer desafiar? Não tô entendendo. Mexeu com MC João, vai ter que mostrar seu talento, vai.
Desenrola, bate, joga de ladinho. Desenrola, bate, joga de ladinho. Apanhando, tá lançando essa brava pra menorzinho. Apanhando, tá lançando essa brava pra menorzinho. Desenrola, bate, joga de ladinho. 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 Desenrola,
O bonde das maravilhas é a nova sensação. E pra começar chama a Carol do tamborzinho. Cora a bunda no chão, vai. 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 Cora a bunda no chão.
Sou a mulher melancia.
Cora a bunda no chão, vai. Cora a bunda no chão, vai. Cora a bunda no chão.
Tipo cinturinha fina, o popô GG gigante. Sou a mulher melancia que rebola a todo instante. Tipo cinturinha fina, o popô GG gigante. Sou a mulher melancia que rebola a todo instante. A velocidade 5 ensinei para vocês. Agora eu quero ver a velocidade 6. Vai, 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 Peraí. A velocidade 100, 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 a velocidade 100.
Ela balança, mas não para. Balança, mas nunca para. Ela balança, mas não para. Balança, mas nunca para. Ela balança, mas não para. No ritmo dolodum. Quem fez essa pra ela foi o MC Buiu. Bota o dedinho na boca e faz cara de tarada. Vai descendo, rebolando. Balança, mas nunca para. Balança, mas nunca para. Ela balança, mas não para.
Não olha pro lado, quem tá passando é o bonde. Se ficar de calçada, a porrada come. Não olha pro lado, quem tá passando é o bonde. Se ficar de calçada, a porrada come. As mina aqui da área no baile se rebela. Não importa o que eu faço, vira moda entre elas. Fala mal do meu cabelo e da minha maquiagem. Fala mal de mim, mas é minha fã incubada. Ou recalcada, escuta o papo da Beyoncé. Não olha pro lado, quem tá passando é o bonde. Se ficar de calçada, a porrada come. Não olha pro lado, quem tá passando é o bonde. Se ficar de calçada, a porrada come. Come, 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 come.
É o Léo da 17, sucesso com a mulherada.
Eu sei que eu não sou teu dono, mas tu tá na minha mão. Te conheço como a tal da ruivinha do rabetão. Dançando Rei Mandela, sei qual é tua intenção. As carinhas de safada batendo popo no chão. Ô Juliana, o que tu quer de mim? Já falei que eu passo rodando, cai em qualquer papinho. Ô Juliana, o que tu quer de mim? Já falei que eu passo rodando, cai em qualquer papinho. Então deslizar, vem jogando esse pum. Prepara, pode bar, vai ser só colocado. Então deslizar, vem jogando esse pum. Prepara, pode bar, vai ser só colocado. Então deslizar, vem jogando esse pum. Prepara, pode bar, vai ser só colocado. Então deslizar, vem jogando esse pum. Prepara, pode bar, vai ser só colocado.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10. How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
I'm in an actual boat.
I thought Grammarly just fixed grammar. They make boats now?
It's more of a metaphorical boat. Because I've been using Grammarly's AI for years to keep me high and dry. Try it. Grammarly can look through your writing to make it easier to understand. See? Shorter.
Whoa.
Clearer.
Cool.
And better. Now people will get what you're trying to say, and you won't be flooded with confused emails.
Can you do mine?
No problem. Your writing's good, but your word choices could be better.
Wow.
Now your writing is as confident as you are.
If that's even possible. New email.
Oh, well, what about our proposal?
Let me take a look. Woof. You'll be in deep water if you show this to the CEO. Grammarly can point out what's missing. Right there. The CEO will want to see a deadline. And here you should connect the projections back to company strategy.
Yeah, how could I do that? Mia, can you do a deep dive?
On it. 10% higher revenue by next year.
I'm sending it in.
The CEO loves
Vai ser só colocado.
que gosta de entorpecente. E na hora do prazer ela faz coisas salientes. No pode do inferninho, ela tá com a xereca com a gente. No pode do inferninho, ela tá com a xereca com a gente. O GW tá cantando e ela tá carente. Você a tropa te bota, senta na piroca torta, trava xereca se joga, senta na piroca torta, trava xereca se joga, tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa tcheca, tcheca, oi tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa xereca na pica não vai, tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa tcheca, tcheca, oi tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa xereca na pica não vai, tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa tcheca, tcheca, oi tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa xereca na pica não vai. Chega no bar, ela vem assustada, pega nessa o cara traz e passeia. Ela desce gostoso, não dá na parinha, mas novinha vai que claro sem dó, pega nessa o cara traz a volta. Tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa tcheca, tcheca, oi tapa tcheca, tcheca, taca, tapa xereca na pica não vai.
Nigga, eat it, he ate it for lunch. Bitch, on my body, I get what I want. Like, you thought I was feeling you? That nigga a munch. Nigga, eat it, he ate it for lunch. Bitch, on my body, I get what I want. Like, you thought I was feeling you? That nigga a munch. Nigga, eat it, he ate it for lunch. Bitch, on my body, I get what I want. Like, you thought I was feeling you? That nigga a munch. Nigga, eat it, he ate it for lunch. Bitch, on my body, I get what I want.
Daqui de vai mandar, hein? Desse jeitinho. Daqui de vai mandar, hein? Daqui de vai mandar, hein? Ó o beat bonito, ó. Exato. Hoje eu tô pesadão, carregando vários pentes. É tudo que eu sempre quis, pra mim ficar contente. O mano tá tipo bomba e as mina bombo granada. Taca, 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 taca.
que tu não entende nada. Se quiser pode vir, porque essa mina é preparada. Melhor dar espaço pra ela, porque a potência é brava. Vai taca, 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 taca. Vai taca, 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 taca.
Chegou o momento que elas gostam mais. Chegou o momento que elas gostam mais. Que elas jogam o cabelo e ficam olhando pra trás. Que elas jogam o cabelo e ficam olhando pra trás. Quando o Denis mandar, você joga. Joga, 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 joga bunda, joga bunda, joga bunda, vai. 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 Jogo o cabelo e fico olhando pra trás. Jogo o cabelo e fico olhando pra trás. Joga bunda, joga bunda, joga bunda, vai. Joga bunda, joga bunda, joga bunda, vai. Joga bunda, joga bunda, joga bunda, vai. Dando um tiro certeiro no coração do pai. Joga, vai, joga, vai, joga, vai, joga, vai, joga, 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 joga,
Quatro paredes, eu vou acabar contigo, oi. Quatro paredes, eu vou acabar contigo, oi. Em quatro paredes, eu vou acabar contigo, oi.
driving by a crime scene, eh? Do I drive back? Wait, where do I go? Do I go forward or back? Yeah, stop. Stop.
Special ideas for tonight or anything?
Not special.
What are some of your ideas?
I don't know. I don't know. You tell me.
More about him a little later. This next man heading into the house just made a stop at a gas station down the road. As you can see from this security camera video, he bought condoms before coming over to meet a girl he thinks is a 13-year-old virgin.
Come on in. I'm just finishing getting ready.
You didn't have to take a shower.
Well,
He's 37-year-old William Rowell, a service tech for coin-operated machines. Also known as Baron Wolfsfur, he's talking to a decoy named Sassy Little Lady. He tells the girl, "You know that I really want to make love to you, but I want to hold you close to me." The decoy says, "I want that too." Later, using a different screen name, Wolf Knight 30, he tells the decoy he's worried because of the Dateline shows of late. The decoy, responding like a 13-year-old, says, "What's Dateline?" She pretends not to know about the show to see if a man apparently aware of our investigation would still take the risk and show up. He explains to her it's a show on NBC.
Gyges. What up, Gyges? Alright, now. What are we playing? I forgot my mic was cutting out. I just want to be good at something. I don't